October 1st, 331 BC. A cloud of dust rises from the plains of northern Mesopotamia, so thick it blots out the morning sun. On one side stands the largest army the ancient world has ever seen. 200,000 soldiers, 200 scythed chariots, 15 war elephants. Warriors drawn from every corner of an empire that stretches from the shores of Egypt to the mountains of India. And on the other side, a young man just 25 years old, with barely 47,000 men at his back. He is outnumbered nearly 5 to 1. Every military logic says he should retreat. Every calculation says he should negotiate. But Alexander of Macedon does not calculate the way other men do. He calculates in glory. And on this day, in a single afternoon, he will shatter the greatest empire the world has ever known. This is the story of Gaugamela, the battle that changed the ancient world forever. To understand what happened on that dusty plain, we need to go back. Not just months, but years. Alexander did not arrive at Gaugamela by accident. Every step of his journey from the rocky hills of Macedonia to the burning sands of Egypt had been building toward this single decisive moment. And to understand Alexander, you must first understand the world that made him. Alexander was born in 356 BC in the Kingdom of Macedonia, a rugged land in the northern reaches of the Greek world. His father was King Philip II, a cunning statesman and a military genius in his own right. Philip had transformed Macedonia from a backwater kingdom constantly threatened by its neighbors into the dominant power in Greece. He invented a new kind of army, the Macedonian phalanx built around the sarissa, a terrifying pike that stretched over 20 feet long. When hundreds of men lowered those pikes in formation, the effect was like a porcupine of iron. No cavalry could charge it. No infantry could approach it. Philip had forged a weapon. Alexander would wield it against the world. But Philip gave his son more than just an army. He gave him Aristotle. The greatest philosopher of the age tutored the young prince for 3 years, teaching him science, medicine, literature, and above all, ambition. Aristotle planted in Alexander the seed of a vision that went beyond Greece, beyond Persia, beyond anything the ancient world had imagined. Alexander grew up believing he was destined for greatness. And when Philip was assassinated by a bodyguard in 336 BC, the 20-year-old prince seized the throne with iron certainty. Within 2 years, Alexander had subdued the restless Greek city-states, destroyed the city of Thebes as a warning to any who might rebel, and set his sights on the true prize, the vast and wealthy Persian Empire. In the spring of 334 BC, he crossed the Hellespont into Asia with 37,000 soldiers, a heavily indebted treasury, and a dream that bordered on madness. His first test came at the Battle of the Granicus River. The Persian governors of Asia Minor had assembled a formidable army along the riverbank, with their cavalry positioned on the far shore. Conventional wisdom said to wait to find a better crossing. Alexander charged straight into the river. The fighting was savage. At one point, a Persian nobleman brought his sword down on Alexander's head, only for the blow to be deflected by his helmet. Another Persian cavalry officer raised his weapon to finish the young king. But Clitus, the black one of Alexander's commanders, severed the man's arm at the last instant. Alexander nearly died in his very first major battle. But he won, and the western provinces of Persia began to crumble. Then came Issus. In November 333 BC, Alexander found himself in a trap, or what should have been one. King Darius III The ruler of the Persian Empire had maneuvered his massive army behind Alexander, cutting off his supply lines. Darius had perhaps 120,000 men. Alexander had roughly 40,000. The battlefield was narrow, hemmed in by mountains on one side and the sea on the other. Darius believed the sheer weight of numbers would overwhelm the Macedonian upstart. He was wrong. Alexander studied the terrain and realized that the narrow ground actually neutralized Darius's numerical advantage. The Persians could not deploy their full force. Alexander led a devastating cavalry charge directly at the Persian center, aimed not at the Persian army, but at Darius himself. The effect was electric. As Alexander's companion cavalry crashed through the Persian lines, heading straight for the great king, something extraordinary happened. Darius panicked. The King of Kings, ruler of the largest empire on earth, commander of the most powerful army ever assembled, turned his royal chariot around and fled. He left behind his army. He left behind his war chest. And most humiliatingly of all, he left behind his family, his mother Sisygambis, his wife Statera, and his daughters. Alexander captured them all, but instead of treating them as prisoners, he treated them like royalty. When Sisygambis accidentally bowed to Alexander's taller companion, Hephaestion mistaking him for the king, Alexander told her gently, "Do not worry, mother. He too is Alexander." It was a gesture of grace from a young man who could have been cruel, and it was calculated to send a message across the empire. Alexander was not a barbarian. He was the rightful ruler. After Issus, Darius offered peace 3 times. He offered staggering sums of gold, 10,000 talents, then 30,000. He offered all the lands west of the Euphrates River. He offered his own daughter's hand in marriage. Alexander's most trusted general, the 60-year-old Parmenion, counseled acceptance. "If I were Alexander," Parmenion said, "I would accept these terms." Alexander's reply became legendary, "So would I if I were Parmenion." He refused every offer. He did not want half an empire. He wanted all of it and the world beyond. Alexander spent the next 18 months securing the eastern Mediterranean. He besieged the island fortress of Tyre for 7 months, building an enormous causeway across the sea itself to reach its walls. He took Gaza after a brutal 2-month siege. And then he marched into Egypt, where he was greeted not as a conqueror, but as a liberator, freeing the Egyptians from the Persian yoke. At the remote desert oasis of Siwa, the priests of the oracle of Ammon hailed him as the son of Zeus. Whether Alexander truly believed himself divine, no one can say. But by the spring of 331 BC, as he finally turned east toward the heart of Persia, he was no longer just a king. He was something beyond mortal, at least in the eyes of the men who followed him. But while Alexander had been busy in Egypt, Darius had not been idle. The Persian king knew that the next battle would decide everything. There would be no more negotiations, no more retreats. He had one chance to save his empire, and he would pour everything he had into it. For months, Darius assembled the most colossal military force the ancient world had ever seen. Summons went out to every province of his empire. Bactrians came from the deserts of Central Asia. Indian cavalry rode from the Indus Valley. Scythian horse archers galloped down from the northern steppes. Armenian heavy cavalry, Babylonian infantry, Cappadocian spearmen, Greek mercenaries who had chosen Persian gold over Greek patriotism. Ancient sources claim the army numbered anywhere from 200,000 to 1 million men. Modern historians, constrained by logistics, what a pre-modern supply chain could actually sustain, place the figure between 50,000 and 120,000. But even the most conservative estimate made Darius's army vastly superior in numbers to anything Alexander could field. And Darius did not stop at manpower. He ordered the construction of 200 scythed chariots, terrifying war machines with razor-sharp blades extending from their axles and wheel hubs, designed to slice through infantry formations like a scythe through wheat. He brought 15 war elephants from his Indian provinces, beasts that most Macedonians had never seen, let alone fought. And most importantly, he chose his ground with meticulous care. The plain of Gaugamela, near the village that shared its name, meaning the camel's house, in the old Aramaic tongue, was located northeast of the ancient city of Nineveh, in what is today northern Iraq, near the modern city of Erbil. It was a stroke of strategic brilliance. Unlike Issus, where the narrow terrain had strangled Darius's advantage, Gaugamela was wide, flat, and open, a cavalry commander's paradise. Darius would never make the same mistake twice. He sent engineers weeks in advance to flatten the battlefield. They cleared rocks, filled ditches, and smoothed the ground so that his chariots could charge at maximum speed, and his vast cavalry could maneuver without impediment. He even had metal caltrops, spiked iron devices scattered in areas where he expected Alexander's cavalry to advance, designed to lame their horses. Every detail was planned, every contingency considered. For the first time in the war, Darius would fight on terrain of his own choosing, at a time of his own choosing, with an army of his own design. The trap was set. The stage was prepared. And Darius was certain, absolutely certain, that this time the outcome would be different. Alexander's army crossed the Euphrates in late summer and turned north, surprising the Persians, who expected him to march straight south toward Babylon. On September 20th, as the Macedonians forded the Tigris River, a near-total lunar eclipse darkened the sky. Alexander's seers declared that the eclipse foretold the fall of a great king, a king of the East. The soldiers took heart. The gods, it seemed, were with them. 4 days later, Macedonian scouts captured Persian outriders, who revealed Darius's exact position. The two armies were barely 8 miles apart. Alexander gave his exhausted troops 4 full days to rest. He fed them well. He let them sleep deeply. And on the evening of September 30th, he led them to a ridge overlooking the plain of Gaugamela. What they saw below must have tested the courage of the bravest men alive. From horizon to horizon, the Persian camp stretched across the darkened plain, an ocean of campfires, tens of thousands of flickering lights that seemed to mirror the stars above. The murmur of 200,000 voices carried on the night wind, the stamping of horses, the rattling of chariot wheels. It was a sight that could break a man's resolve just by looking at it. The old general Parmenion came to Alexander in his tent and urged a night attack strike before dawn. Use the darkness to negate the enemy's numbers. Alexander refused. "I will not steal my victory," he said. Whether this was supreme confidence or calculated psychology, the effect was devastating. That night, while Alexander slept so soundly that his officers had to physically shake him awake at dawn, Darius kept his entire army standing in battle formation through the darkness, terrified of a surprise attack that never came. By sunrise on October 1st, the Persian soldiers had been awake all night. They were exhausted, anxious, and demoralized before a single blow had been struck. The morning revealed the full geometry of the problem Alexander faced. His 47,000 men were deployed on an open plain against a force that overlapped his lines on both sides by thousands of yards. If Darius could envelop him, wrap his enormous cavalry around both flanks, Alexander's army would be surrounded and annihilated. Every conventional instinct said this battle was unwinnable, As the Macedonian army assembled in the pale dawn light, Alexander rode along the front ranks on his magnificent war horse, Bucephalus. He wore a breastplate of polished iron, a white-plumed helmet that caught the first rays of sunlight, and a cloak of brilliant purple, the color of kings. He called out to his soldiers by name, reminding them of battles they had won together, of enemies they had defeated side by side. An eagle, the sacred bird of Zeus, appeared overhead, soaring toward the Persian lines. The army erupted in cheers. To them, it was a sign from the gods themselves. But Alexander did not think conventionally. He deployed his army in a formation the ancient world had never seen, a formation that military historians would study for the next 2,000 years. His main phalanx held the center, their 20-foot sarissas bristling forward like a wall of iron. On the right wing, Alexander himself commanded his elite companion cavalry, the finest horsemen in the world. On the left, the dependable Parmenian held with the Thessalian cavalry. But then came the innovation. Alexander angled infantry units on both flanks, bending them backward at 45-degree angles to form what historians call refused flanks. Behind his main line, he placed a second reserve line infantry that could wheel around and fight in any direction if the Persians broke through. He had built a hollow box, a defensive shell that could absorb attacks from every direction, wrapped around an offensive hammer, and the hammer was Alexander himself. The battle began. Alexander led his right wing not forward, but laterally sliding to the right across the battlefield at an oblique angle. This was not a retreat. This was a trap. He was deliberately drawing the Persian left wing under Bessus further and further away from the center. Darius, watching from his chariot, ordered Bessus to follow Alexander and prevent him from moving beyond the flattened, prepared ground. And as the Persian left stretched to pursue Alexander, the inevitable happened. A gap tore open in the Persian line between the left wing and the center, like a seam splitting under pressure. This was the opening Alexander had been manufacturing from the very first moment of battle. But before he could strike, Darius launched his scythed chariots. 200 of them thundered toward the Macedonian center at full gallop, their bladed wheels shrieking through the air. This was supposed to be the killing blow, the weapon Darius had spent months preparing, the machines of death designed to shatter the Macedonian phalanx. The Macedonians did not flinch. Light infantry, Agrianian javelin throwers, and Cretan archers stepped forward and unleashed a devastating barrage. Horses collapsed screaming. Drivers were struck down. Chariots veered wildly and overturned. And the chariots that somehow made it through found something astonishing. The phalanx soldiers simply opened their ranks, creating lanes through which the chariots passed harmlessly. Behind the lines, grooms and camp servants dispatched the stranded chariots. Darius's great trump card, his months of preparation, his carefully flattened battlefield had been neutralized in minutes. Now came the moment that decided the fate of the ancient world. Alexander saw the gap. He seized it, forming his companion cavalry into a tight wedge formation, with himself riding at the razor-sharp tip. He charged directly into the opening between the Persian center and the Persian left. The hypaspists, his elite shield-bearing infantry, surged forward on his flank. Elements of the phalanx followed. Together they formed an unstoppable column of Macedonian fury that punched through the Persian line like a spear through silk. Once through, Alexander wheeled left and drove straight at Darius. The companions crashed into the Persian royal guard, elite cavalry, and Greek mercenary hoplites, who fought with desperate ferocity. Spears shattered, swords rang, men fell from their horses screaming. The fighting was point-blank savage and merciless. Alexander himself was in the thick of it, his armor splattered with blood, his horse foaming beneath him. And then as the Macedonian wedge cut closer and closer to the royal chariot, Darius looked across the chaos of battle and saw death riding toward him. For the second time in his life, the King of Kings made the same fatal choice. He turned. He fled. The great king abandoned his army, his empire, and his honor on the dusty plains of Gaugamela. The collapse was instantaneous. As word of Darius's flight rippled through the Persian ranks, the center disintegrated. Soldiers who had been fighting with courage moments before threw down their weapons and ran. The panic was contagious, spreading outward from the center like cracks in shattering glass. But on the Macedonian left, the battle was far from over. While Alexander had been breaking through the center, the Persian right wing had hurled itself at Parmenian's forces with devastating effect. Persian and Indian cavalry had actually broken through the Macedonian line and ridden all the way to the baggage camp in the rear, where they began looting supplies and freeing prisoners of war. Parmenian was in crisis. He sent an urgent message to Alexander: "Come back now, or the left wing is lost." Alexander faced the most agonizing decision of his career. Darius was fleeing. If Alexander pursued him now, right now, he could capture the great king and end the war in a single stroke. But if he ignored Parmenian, his entire left flank could collapse. His army could be cut in half, and everything he had built would be destroyed. He turned back. Wheeling his companion cavalry around, Alexander rode hard toward the left. On the way, he smashed into a mass of Persian and Parthian cavalry, trying to escape the battlefield. The collision was horrific, the fiercest hand-to-hand fighting of the entire battle. 60 of Alexander's elite companions were killed in that single engagement. But Alexander fought through his sword arm, never stopping, and reached Parmenian's position. By then, the Thessalian cavalry, under Parmenian, had held with extraordinary valor. And when news of Darius's flight reached the Persian right wing, their assault began to falter. The cavalry that had broken through to the baggage camp found itself stranded and surrounded. Within the hour, the Persian right wing collapsed entirely. The Battle of Gaugamela was over. The Persian Empire had fallen. The pursuit that followed was relentless and merciless. Alexander chased the fleeing Persians through the night and into the next morning, covering over 70 miles before his exhausted horsemen could ride no further. Thousands of Persian soldiers were cut down as they ran. Others drowned trying to cross the Lycus River in the darkness, their heavy armor dragging them beneath the black water. Abandoned weapon shields and royal standards littered the road for miles. The destruction was total and absolute. Ancient sources report Persian casualties between 40,000 and 90,000 killed, while Macedonian losses numbered perhaps 500 to 1,500, a ratio that seems almost impossible, but which reflects the terrible mathematics of ancient warfare, where a broken army in flight suffered far more casualties than one that held its ground. Even adjusting for the exaggeration typical of ancient historians, the scale of the victory was almost beyond comprehension. The Persian army, the largest ever assembled, had ceased to exist as a fighting force in a single afternoon. Darius fled east first to Ecbatana, then deeper into the empire's remote provinces, gathering what loyal followers he could. But his power was broken. Within a year, his own generals would betray him. The satrap Bessus, the same man who had commanded the Persian left wing at Gaugamela, conspired with others to murder the king. In July 330 BC, Alexander's scouts found Darius's body abandoned in a wooden cart on a dusty road. He had been stabbed and left to die by the very men who were supposed to protect him. when Alexander reached the cart, he is said to have wept. He removed his own purple cloak and draped it over the dead king's body. He ordered Darius buried with full royal honors at Persepolis. Whatever Alexander thought of Darius as a warrior, he honored him as a fellow sovereign. No King Alexander declared should die at the hands of his own servants. With Darius gone, the gates of the empire swung open. Within weeks of Gaugamela, Alexander entered Babylon, one of the greatest cities in the world, without resistance. The Babylonians opened their gates and lined the streets with flowers. He marched to Susa, where he seized the imperial treasury, 50,000 talents of gold and silver, a fortune so vast it required 20,000 mules and 5,000 camels to transport. Then he reached Persepolis, the ceremonial capital of the Achaemenid dynasty, a city of towering columns and magnificent palaces that had stood for 2 centuries as the supreme symbol of Persian power. Its great audience hall, the Apadana, could hold 10,000 people beneath a ceiling supported by 72 columns, each 65 feet tall. The walls were decorated with carvings of every nation in the empire, bringing tribute to the King of Kings. It was quite simply one of the most magnificent buildings humanity had ever constructed. Alexander burned it to the ground. Whether the fire was a calculated act of revenge for Xerxes' burning of Athens in 480 BC, or a drunken mistake during a wild celebration, historians still debate. But the symbolism was unmistakable. The old world was gone. The age of Alexander had begun. The Battle of Gaugamela was the hinge of ancient history. Before that October afternoon, the world was divided between East and West, between the Greek civilization and the Persian civilization. 2 powers that had clashed for 2 centuries. After Gaugamela, those worlds collided, merged, and transformed. Alexander's conquests carried Greek language, philosophy, art, and science deep into Asia. Cities called Alexandria sprang up across the ancient world in Egypt, in Afghanistan, in the Indus Valley. Greek became the common tongue of trade and diplomacy from the Mediterranean to Central Asia. Ideas flowed in every direction, creating the Hellenistic world, a fusion of cultures that would shape civilization for centuries to come and lay the groundwork for the Roman Empire, the spread of Christianity, and the intellectual traditions that still define the modern West. The military lessons of Gaugamela resonated across millennia. Alexander proved that numbers alone do not decide battles. Training discipline, tactical imagination, and above all decisive leadership at the critical moment can overcome even the most staggering odds. Every great commander who followed studied his campaigns. Hannibal carried accounts of Alexander's battles with him across the Alps. Julius Caesar wept before a statue of Alexander, lamenting that at the same age he had accomplished so little. Napoleon called him the greatest general who ever lived. Gaugamela remained the supreme example of how a smaller army can destroy a larger one through maneuver timing and the raw courage to strike at the enemy's heart. But perhaps the most lasting lesson of Gaugamela is what it reveals about the nature of power itself. Darius had everything: numbers, resources, preparation, terrain, chariots, elephants, and the wealth of the largest empire on earth. He had every material advantage a commander could wish for, and yet he lost. Because at the decisive moment, when the battle hung in the balance and history itself seemed to hold its breath, Darius chose to run, and Alexander chose to charge. In the end, the Battle of Gaugamela was not decided by chariots or elephants or the sheer mass of armies stretched across a plain. It was decided by the will of two men standing at the crossroads of history. One chose to flee from destiny. The other rode straight into it, bareheaded spear in hand, screaming a war cry that echoed across 23 centuries. And that single choice, made in a heartbeat on a blood-soaked field in Mesopotamia, reshaped the world we live in today. If you found this story as powerful as we did, subscribe to History of That Day and join us as we uncover the forgotten chapters of history that shaped everything.